Hey everybody, Glenn from Third Millennium. Something a little different today, question and answer time. And get a lot of customer questions about Miata audio, but just some just audio in general. And what we've decided to do is start putting together some videos on some of these questions, and we're going to have a bunch of these coming through. So first one to get us started today from a guy named Doug in Minnesota. He actually has a 91 Miata, and his was a base model, and he did a retrofit with our retrofit kit for putting the headrest speakers into the base, which it didn't come with the headrest speakers. So nice job on that, Doug. His question, my radio, I won't mention the manufacturer, it doesn't really matter. The radio that I purchased puts out 40 watts per channel. The Millennium 5s are rated for 15. It's a 10 continuous, 15 RMS. Is it going to be a problem using the Millennium 5s with the radio, since the radio has a higher power rating? Thanks for the question. This is one that a lot of people get confused on, and unfortunately, it's also one where some radio manufacturers, almost all radio manufacturers, take a huge amount of liberty with reported power values, because it is, and it has become, a marketing sales value. It used to be you didn't really see power ratings for car stereo. I'm talking, 40 years ago. It just really wasn't something that was terribly relevant. But now that's a big leading part of the advertising. So question is, you have a radio that says it puts out 40 watts a channel, you have a speaker that's rated for 10 or 15, is it okay? The answer, yes, it is okay. The reason that it's okay is when you get a power rating, whether it's for a radio, the built-in amps that are in the radio, or an external amp, or for a speaker, that is intended to represent a maximum power rating. Okay, so in other words, that radio theoretically puts out up to 40 watts per channel. Okay, the Millennium 5s, when we designed those, one of the tests that we actually did is run them with pink noise, which is a kind of a snow. We did a pink noise at a continuous 10 watts for 10 minutes. It's a very unpleasant, loud, and remember, Millennium 5s are about 4 inches from your head. They're almost earphones. Okay, that's how close they are. So the reason that it's okay is because those are maximum ratings. You're never going to approach that. Typical listening through headrest speakers might be a couple of watts, very often less than a watt. The reason, again, is how close they are to your ears and so forth, which is why you don't require huge amounts of power. But a more important question, or a more important issue really, is I needed to clarify with him also about his radio. And the fact is, the radio is labeled at 40 watts per channel. It does not produce 40 watts per channel. What the manufacturers do, because that is it's a marketing point that they're trying to make in terms of comparing that radio to another radio. It has, they say that one has 40 watts. Now, I have some pictures that I'm going to put up, different face plates and different manufacturers, all of them reputable manufacturers, many of them. There, of course, are some that are not reputable, but even the good manufacturers are very generous with those power ratings. But you'll find radios that are rated for 25 watts per channel, 40 watts per channel, 100 watts a channel, 500 watts a channel, 1,000 watts per channel. What are you actually supposed to make of that? Well, the answer is there's some physics and electronics that's involved, which is why we're sitting here at the bench today, which really dictates how much power actually an amplifier is going to be able to put out. And we're going to actually go through that with you. What I actually have here on the bench is, this is a radio out of 2004 LS Miata, and it was a pretty nice stereo system. This one you were able to add a CD satellite radio, which back then was quite new, as well as a mini disc player or a tape player, so they made it quite expensive. And this would have been an expensive option on the car. So what we're going to actually measure the power output that you can actually get out of the radio. We'll do that with a audio generator and a digital scope here. You don't have to know how this stuff works. It's just, if you're interested, we're going to take this radio and we're going to show you what it is. Here's what the reality is. Any radio that goes into any 12-volt car, aftermarket, whether it's factory radio in the Miatas, it's going to have a power output, a clean power output per channel of somewhere between 8 to 12, maybe 13 watts, but that's going to be it, regardless of what it says on the nameplate. This is a byproduct of the fact that the car is a 12-volt electrical system, and in a 12-volt electrical system, there is, when you have 12 volts feeding an amplifier circuit, there's simply a limited amount of power that you're going to be able to get out of it. That's why external amplifiers for car stereo, what's in the box? Well, one of the things that's in the box, in addition to the amplifier circuitry, is circuitry that steps the voltage up from the 12 volts that you'd have in a car, 14 when it's running for the alternator, but 12 volts, we'll just call it 12. The 12 volts that you have in a car, you got to step that up, and different amplifiers will do that in different ways, but that could be as much as 60, 70 volts that the voltage gets stepped up to, and then with sufficient current and sufficient voltage, you can actually have an amplifier that will produce quite a bit more power. So to answer the original question again, radio says at least that it produces more power than the power rating for the Millennium 5 speakers. Is it okay? Yes, it's okay. Here's what the rule is. Simply do not drive the speakers to the point where you hear distortion. It's the same for whether it's the door speakers, headrest speakers, wind blocker speakers, home speakers. Doesn't matter either. When you hear distortion, that's when the damage actually starts. And the distortion in many cases is going to be coming from the amplifier and not from the speakers. The speakers are doing their best to reproduce what's being sent to it, but it's a distorted signal. We're actually going to see that when we look at the oscilloscope here in just a minute, where we're actually going to be able to look at the waveform and see exactly what it looks like and be able to see the distortion when we send a signal into it. So I'm going to go ahead, get the camera, I'm going to pick it up, move it over here so that you can see exactly what the setup is here on the bench, and then we'll go ahead and we'll see what sort of power output we can get. Okay, so let's take a look at what we got. This is our radio. Again, this is Miata OEM radio. I'm not even sure who the manufacturer was on this one specifically, but it came out of a 2004 LS. And what we're doing is we're feeding it a 1 kilohertz signal. We're actually going through a little audio to FM to get the signal in here on an FM channel. So we're sending that 1K signal through here, and we can actually hear it. Okay, so it's getting into here. We have both channels. I've got 4 ohm dummy load here and here. So this is our best case scenario with power on a amplifier, audio amplifier. Remember, the lower the speaker impedance load, the greater the power you're able to get out of it. There's a practical limit on that where it gets to a certain point. If the impedance keeps dropping, the amplifier will eventually think that it's just working into a short circuit. And this was some of the trickery that Bose did with the Bose systems with the 1 ohm drivers in the doors. So that's exactly what they were. Power supply, we're going to feed this 12 volts. We'll see the amplifier power creep up as we turn our voltage up here. And then on the scope, way we have it set up and what's really going to be relevant here is we're going to want to watch this voltage RMS right here. We're going to have a waveform that we're going to create, and then we're going to see the voltage RMS, because that, with a little bit of math, is going to go ahead and give us the number of watts. And we're going to actually observe the 1 kilohertz tone here on the screen, and that's going to, and when we see it distort, we'll know that we've reached the maximum power output of this radio. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to start turning the volume control up on the radio, and you'll see that we have a sine wave coming through. This is 1 kilohertz. All right. Now, the purple line underneath is going to give us secondary harmonics distortion. So right now, you can disregard this one line on the end here. So right now we have a clean line here, which means this is a clean amount of power that we're outputting. And you see that our voltage RMS, this is the one we want to watch here, 3.3 volts. We'll just keep turning the volume up. We're up to 3.2 amps now on the power supply. And right there you see the bottom here flattening off and the top flattening off. That's what's called clipping. We've now exceeded the ability of the amplifier to amplify that signal cleanly, and it's cutting off the waveforms. This is really important to understand. The amplifier is capable of putting out quite a bit more power than it can do cleanly, but at a highly distorted level. This is why I said the speaker, you'll hear it coming through distorted. It's not the speaker, it's the amplifier which is giving up on producing the signal. So what we do, if we back this off, you'll see that we have 6.3 volts RMS. So I'll get my handy calculator out here. So we take 6.3, we square that, and we divide it by 4 because we're using a 4 ohm load, and we have 9.92. I don't know if you can see on the calculator there. 9.92 watts is what we have for clean power. Now, you can fiddle around with this a little bit in terms of levels and so forth, and this would be significantly lower for an 8 ohm speaker. But the important thing to recognize here is that the value is going to be constrained here as a function of the power supply that we're working with. In fact, we have 12 volts. Now watch what happens too when I turn this up a little bit. Watch the purple line down here. You'll see that we're starting to get some of these secondary harmonic distortions starting to arise as well. Things are starting to sound really bad at this point if you had a speaker on here trying to listen to this. And again, this is what can actually damage speakers by sending through these kinds of signals. So you can see that we can continue in terms of the RMS voltage, getting more out of this thing. The problem is, I think we're all the way up now, maximum. It's at a highly distorted level. Okay, so that's it. Don't drive the speakers. Do not turn up the volume to the point where the sound is coming through distorted through whatever speaker it is, because it's most likely that your amplifier has run out of steam, and you do risk damaging the speakers when you do that. The other side of this is, what if you actually do have an external amp? You've put a nice stereo into the car, and you've got a honest, 30, 40, 50 watts per channel, whatever it is. In fact, in our 2012 Miata, and I'll leave a link here for that video, we put in a Pioneer, I think it was a I think it was a D1004 amp, and we have the output what's called bridged, which is its high power mode, and we're getting probably a good honest 60 watts per channel going into our M800 speakers. Is that actually a problem? No, same issue. Just don't drive until you get into distortion. If you hear distortion, just back it off a little bit. Clean power rarely damages speakers. Distorted power with the waveform like we just saw there on the scope, that damages speakers. So anyway, hope this helps you guys out. Have any questions about this, please leave them in the comments below. Any questions you'd like us to answer in one of these videos, go ahead and send them in to us. So you can leave them in the comments below or use the contact form on our website, 3maudio.com, and we'll be glad to respond to you. We do respond to all customer email, any questions you guys have. So if you are not already a subscriber, please go ahead and do that. Something like 96% of our viewers are not subscribers. So please do that. That does help us out a little bit in terms of underwriting the cost of doing some of this production, and also letting us know that you do find the things useful. So we appreciate that. Give it a like. Anyway, thanks very much. Enjoy your Miatas.